So yes, this is what it's about, how on-the-job learning or practice learning or field education, called different things in different places, how this is managed and assessed. There is a whole series of documents that might go with the program, trying to work out things like, is an activity on the job or off the job learning? You do not know. You do not need to know or learn this off by heart. This is just a kind of an example of the kind of guidance we are given. And if you are in doubt, please just ask. I've kind of very much got an open door policy and a welcome questions. Okay, and if you wouldn't mind muting your mic, that'd be really helpful too. So broadly speaking, on the job is in the workplace, surprise, surprise, where the apprentices will be either 3 or 4 days a week. 3 days a week for part-timers, 4 days a week for the majority of people, full-time workers. Then they would have 1 day a week off the job. And off the job simply is either learning in the university or self-directed study. And this applies for the whole year. So you may be used to other courses where we talk about things like term times and things of that nature. The apprenticeship doesn't really work like that. It's kind of covers the whole year. They mainly have most of their assignments submitted in June, but there is also a summer timetable. So that 1 day a week that they have for off-the-job learning, that continues for the whole year. So who might be involved? Well, there's various folk involved, and you'll get to know a bit more about these people, but it'd be surprising if it was a little bit confusing at first. So at the top, of course, we have the apprentice, direct work. They're bringing that into the university in a very useful way and taking out things that they learn into the workplace. So they're all about learning and development. And our job collectively is to try to ensure they have the space and time to do that. Now, it's a difficult juggling act, work, life, study. They do get through it, but it's not without its challenges. The mentor, that's you, and really your job is to kind of support and supervise them in work and to ensure that learning opportunities are agreed and in place. You do contribute to the assessment, but you don't do the final assessment. There are some direct observations, support, supervision, things of that nature. I'll try to explain a little bit more about that. The line manager, sometimes the line manager and the mentor are the same person. But when writing the program, we had to write it in such a way that it is flexible enough to meet the needs of around 30 different employers across London. As I'm sure you'll know, social work has commonalities, but the way it's delivered can be very different. So we have to have quite a degree of flexibility in the program. Quite often the line manager is the mentor, but quite often the line manager will delegate that to a team member, usually an experienced person. People with lived experience of social work, obviously, we're seeking feedback, we're kind of observing direct practice, and we have a very active, what we call PLE group in the university who contribute to teaching, curriculum development, and things of that nature. The sub-regional assessor, we're currently recruiting for these roles, and you won't come across that person yet, but the university is responsible for the final assessment of on-the-job learning. So those of you who are practice educators know that there's a big old report that is done at the end of placements, big chunky thing. The mentor does not do that, we do that. So we've kind of split the role of university tutor and assessor and practice educator in a slightly different way from business as usual, mainly because that's what the employers asked us to do. We've been talking to the employers since 2018. We're the preferred provider for apprentices in London, and our course seems to be, well, I don't know, we get great feedback and a lot of firsts out of the course. So we seem to be doing pretty well. Hopefully that will continue. So what is a mentor? So as I said, the mentor can be a separate person or it can be the line manager, but the actual phrase in Western tradition comes from the tale of Ulysses, who goes wandering across the world on having various adventures and leaves his son behind, Telemachus. And Telemachus is looked after by none other than Mentor. And it turns out first Mentor was rubbish. He was absolutely no good at the job and needed Diana, the goddess of war and wisdom, interesting job description there, to sort them out. But of course, mentoring and various different versions of this is universal. It's a universal thing. It's not unique to the Western tradition, but that's where the phrase comes from. Here's a little symbol for Sankofa, the idea that one must, and that there is no shame in going back to the past and learning about things. Sounds a little bit like reflective practice to me, but that's from West Africa. So you can find traditions of mentoring globally. And what do mentors do? Well, it seems as one person, the mentor, communicates interest and care for the well-being and development of another, very straightforward, and who comes to recognize that the mentor is on their side, and the value to them of the mentor is about experience, knowledge, and outlook. So as kind of a general definition, there's millions of definitions, unsurprisingly. That's not a bad start, but we'll see what that looks like in a bit more detail shortly. But of course, first of all, they are always going to be professional standards, aren't there? The apprentices are monitored quite heavily by the external funding agencies, the IATE, the Institute of Apprenticeships, etc. And there's a set of apprenticeship standards. Don't, for a minute, think that you have to learn these things off, because that would be tedious and impossible. But we have a little tool that helps you turn these into something more useful, which you will see in a short while. Obviously, we have professional standards, but they are only really relevant in the final year of their study. Social Work England do not register students. Previous regulators have done so. Maybe Social Work England are thinking about that too, but I don't see any signs of that quite at the moment. But they also regulate our program. So we're due yet another visit in November. And we've also had Ofsted, who also regulate our program. Seems to be an enormous amount of regulators. You would wonder what they all do. But this is our baseline standard, which is the PCF. It's familiar to everybody, I think. It is, how would I say, developed by the profession, for the profession. And one of the key advantages, apart from the fact that it's understandable, which I do wonder about some of the other standards, it has progression built into it. So we know that the standard required for a person to enter a course is very different from the advanced and strategic levels, and it gives us some sort of clues about what the difference between these levels might be. And that's also very helpful for designing, teaching, and learning, which is my business. So we start off with the PCF, and at this stage of the year, that's all they're doing. They'll start with the apprenticeship standards in the new year, but at the moment, we're trying to get them used to the PCF. How does the program as a whole work? Well, if you can kind of imagine this as kind of like a figure of 8. So the difference for our students is they have live experience all the time. So they're bringing that into the classroom, talking about their experiences, talking about the tricky cases that are probably the ones that take most of your time also. But they are also learning things in the university and taking that out into the workplace. So you got a kind of a virtuous figure of 8, where the apprenticeship program is kind of supported by what's happening in the workplace, but also the learners are developing their knowledge and skills in both contexts, basically. So you kind of think, well, how do people learn things? How they acquire skills? Well, it's a process. So as we like to tell them, it's 3 years. So initially they'll be assessed at the level of readiness for direct practice. This is fairly straightforward, and they should essentially just walk over that. They present with a fair few kind of issues or barriers to learning in their first year. For example, quite a few apprentices, not untypically, will be have their first diagnosis of dyslexia, which can be a revelation for a lot of people, or maybe other neurodiversity. And we are quite able in the university to support students like that, but you can see that it's the beginning of quite fundamental changes. both personally and professionally for a lot of people we're working with. So it's not necessarily a linear process, but over the 3 years, we expect them to get to at least proficiency, and that's what we see. What we're asking them to do in the final year is very different from the first year. So slowly but surely, stop, start, kind of trips in the road, bumps on the road, various things like that happen as we go. But as I say, it's a process, not an event. I mean, social work is more than knowledge, is it not? It's more than knowing facts. There's something about, I suppose, what we talk about a lot is embracing or being able to cope with ambiguity and uncertainty. That's what the social work world is like, is it not? You can also look at it another way. Kind of cycle of change is a very well known thing from Chaska and Di Clemente. And this might be a spiral. This started off in substance misuse. Actually, it started off in smoking cessation. But at the moment, they're in contemplation and preparation and action. They're on that side of the thing. They've already decided where they will go. And they will kind of go around this cycle in various different ways at different times. Or if you like, you could also do career change based on Kubler-Ross. So they start off in a great mood, etc., and then they kind of go, "Oh my God, this is tougher than I thought it would go. How am I ever going to manage all of that?" And then, well, actually, you know what? I've had some feedback, and I think I know more than what I thought. So there'll be ups and downs. It's the long and short of it. At the moment, we're again, this is slide for information rather than reading, but this is what we're kind of getting them to do in class and getting them ready for. About supervision, about journeys into social work. That's their first assignment. So, it's a personal and professional transition. If you think back yourself into what decided you, as it were, into a career in social work, you know yourself, there's a whole series of things that go into that. That's the first thing we ask them to write about. So really for today's purpose, next up really on the list would be the mentoring agreement. Now, the mentoring agreement is similar to those of you who are a practice educator will have heard the phrase placement learning agreement. So it's similar to that, but it, how you recall it, sets out the baseline for learning. And we're kind of doing this fairly slowly, giving it the time it deserves. And I'll tell you what I would like you to focus on with the apprentice in coming weeks. The apprentice knows about this, and I've had briefings about it. So hopefully when you do get a chance to meet up, you'll be on the same page. So there is a template. I'm not going to send you out the template. The apprentice will bring that to you. They are adult learners. They can take responsibility for that. At the end of the day, it's up to you to make it real. We talk about relationship-based social work. It's kind of difficult to define and say exactly what that is, but we know it's an effective way to work. If you don't have a good learning relationship at the start and invest time in that, that's sometimes likely to cause you problems later on. So we've suggested a couple of models, and we'll send you out some stuff about that. Today, I'm just going to talk about social graces, but we also use the Mandela model and various other models like that. And there is a point to using models. Makes your life easier. So in the mentoring process, at the moment, we're getting started and keeping the focus. So kind of building that relationship. Some people, it's not uncommon that an apprentice had the same mentor for over 3 years. Now that's, you don't ask for that, but it seems to work great for everybody when that is the case. But of course, we are talking about contemporary social work, changes in staffing, restructuring in teams, etc., happen. So it's not always possible, but it is certainly valued when that can happen. So we're at stages 1 and 2, thinking about over the next year or so, 3 and 4, and of course over the whole life of the program. So when you see the mentoring agreement, it'll look like this. It's fairly kind of obvious, but the names of everybody involved. And then there's a section on roles and responsibilities. I would bore the life out of you if I went through these things in great detail, but so I would suggest you read these when you get it and come back to me and ask any questions that you might have. It's actually, there's only about another couple of paragraphs on this, but it would be extremely tedious. When in actual fact, what I'd like you to focus on in your initial meetings with the apprentice is getting to know and understand each other. So have a bit of a conversation about, well, why you doing social work? Maybe they want to ask you about the same thing. What's important in the learning relationship? Things like how would they like to receive feedback, that kind of thing. There are tools that you might use for this conversation. You could do it many different ways, but I'm going to talk about one tool in particular that might be useful. It's probably familiar to a lot of people, and describe what you learned about each other. Now, you can see this is a collaborative thing. Both the apprentice and yourself will, whatchamacallit, have a contribution to that section of the agreement. This is what social graces look like. I'm sure you have seen this, but it's actually originally came from systemic family therapy. I'll send you out a couple of things about this so you kind of know what it's about, read the article. But it's about perhaps elements of power, identity, difference, similarities, all those kind of things in the relationship. And it kind of broadens out the conversation in some way. Having a template makes it easier to do that, if you see what I mean. So we think about which elements of the graces might be at play, what assumptions you make about each other, what did you feel about having this conversation, and very importantly, what was visible, voiced, invisible, and unvoiced. Not everything is spoken about, not everything is obvious, and some things are all too obvious, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of like have that conversation, compare and contrast notes. Usually people enjoy doing that, finding out about each other. So we'll send you some information on that and some of the other models that we use. You don't have to do this, you don't have to use it, but we find it's been very helpful for people, and we will send you out some information about some more models as we go. So when I'm talking to the apprentices about apprentices' strengths, people are quite often quite modest about this and kind of go, oh, shucks me, no, I couldn't possibly know how to do anything. And we kind of reframe this to think about, how would I say, an objective professional discussion about what you know and can do already. That should include a whole range of things. And it won't be simply just, yeah, I understand what the Care Act is, I know what Section 47 of the Children Act is, etc., and so on. So that's an important part of it, but also some of it might be about more personal qualities and characteristics, or maybe the kind of support network that the person has, or their ability to build strong networks within their team in an interprofessional way. So have a little go at that. These are just suggestions about possible areas in which to find strengths, but of course the list is by no means exhaustive. And then we're on to learning needs. Now, there are two bits to this. One is obviously what the apprentice would like to learn on the placement. And the other is, are there any blocks or barriers to learning? For example, dyslexia. Are there any physical health needs that need to be taken into account? What about caring responsibilities, for example? So this is kind of a section where you should note those things and make sure you ask about them. Because if we don't ask about these things and are clear and have an agreement about them at the start, things will not go well, basically. Now, that's quite a lot of stuff. I would expect that probably going to take a whole session to go through all of that, and then maybe you can move on to this. This is learning opportunities. What opportunities are available in work? What would you like to get involved in or have more experience of, and how to write these? Now, we will give you a little bit more detail about that, but really, there will be a number of these sessions, usually that are about monthly on the program, and we record things and send them out. So you'll get more detail in lots of different ways. But at the moment, really, it's just about what learning opportunities are there and how do you write them. Now, how do you write them becomes quite important because they have to construct an index of evidence. In other words, an index that says the various things they have done and what they have learned. And usually, if you just say home visit, for example, well, I would see that as a learning opportunity, certainly. But I would have no idea from that one sentence what you did actually learn from the home visit. Might it be you demonstrated professionalism, PCF1, by arranging the visit in a timely manner, kind of being on time, reading the case file beforehand, etc., or might it be kind of intervention and skills? You got there, the person didn't like you very much and started shouting at you. How did you manage that? And so on and so forth. So I need a little bit of description beside or with the actual activity, if you see what I mean. But we'll talk about that more. So again, just to reiterate, we're coming to the end now, you'll be glad to hear. Learning to be a social worker is a process rather than an event. And I don't know about you, I'm still doing a bit of practice, I'm still running groups and stuff like that, but it doesn't ever seem to stop. I'm always learning a new thing. I'm always learning in particular what I don't know and what I did wrong, and sometimes even what I did right. So it's lifelong learning, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So I'm hoping that your experience with the mentor also is learning for yourself because, well, I don't know, I suppose I am an academic, but it's a joyous thing to learn, and in particular to be involved in the professional development of another person. And sometimes you see the progress the person made over 3 years, and it is astounding. And you kind of went, well, will you look at that? But we're always in this mode where initially you're probably doing a lot of shadowing, and then we are doing things with support of other people, and eventually we get to do independently. And at this stage, there's probably going to be more shadowing and doing with support, but by the time they end the program, they'll definitely be doing independently. We have to be a little bit cautious because you don't want to push people out of their well, you do want to push them out of the comfort zone because in comfort zone, nothing much has happened. This is Vygotsky, incidentally, if anybody wants the reference, structural learning, etc., scaffolding, all those kind of things. But in this comfort zone, where a lot of them have been for a while, they're very competent. They know what they're doing. There's a limited kind of range of things that they're asked to do, but not much learning is happening there. In the panic zone, if they're pushed too far, too fast, and we haven't kind of built the foundation of the learning relationship, you don't learn there either because you're just too focused really on survival to actually learn a thing. So there's a sweet spot between the two, which is the learning zone, where you have to step out of your comfort zone into new activities, but not to the extent that it is freaking you out, basically. So putting it all together, it's kind of a complex picture, but it's really a series of alliances between the course and the curriculum at Kingston University and the employer. The employers, incidentally, still have a really active relationship with us. There's ongoing conversations about all elements of the program all the time. So the program has changed and developed over the 4 or 5 years we've been doing it. And then you can see there's the various things that people learn and, of course, the people involved. So I think that is quite enough from me. So now I think we'll move on to the questions thing. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm just going to stop recording before we do the Q&A bit because, well, I think people are more comfortable when they don't have to listen to the recording. So just give me a second to do